Well, many of us love animals and have pets at home, but sometimes we may have more questions than answers as to how to care for them. Joining us today is Dr. Ian Gibson. He is a veterinarian with Ranch Docs Veterinary Services located just outside of Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. Gibson. So good to have you on today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being with you guys.
Well, why don't we start with chatting a little bit about some seasonal issues for pets since it's spring now. So everyone loves springtime, but apparently pets can also struggle with allergies. So what are the symptoms to be on the lookout for and what is the treatment?
So springtime brings a couple more allergens to the table. We've got pollen that's increasing, and that sort of can, if your pet does have a skin allergy, it can exacerbate it. And pets typically want to sort of lick their feet. They often scratch their ears, lick their abdomen. They might sort of, typical to humans, also start sneezing. So that's sort of the type of signs we see. If you're dealing with sort of a skin sort of allergy, you might be okay to give your pet regular wash with shampoo, often a medicated shampoo wash. And if it's something more severe, you might want to consult your veterinarian, and there are actually specific products that we can give that can help with the allergies.
Oh, that's good to know. I know, like, we as humans often think of ourselves as getting allergies, and we don't think of the animals. The poor little guys get allergies too. I know I have a cat that often sneezes, so maybe I should get that checked out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I understand another thing to be watching out for is ticks, especially this time of year. So how can we prevent ticks from attaching to our pets, and how should you deal with it if they do get ticks?
So with the warmer weather, the ticks are definitely moving, and the easiest way these days to manage ticks are just using a monthly tablet in dogs, and then a topical treatment in cats that also generally lasts about a month's time. And those treatments just prevent the pests from actually getting on the animal, and they can't bite the dog or the cat. And that's probably the easiest way to do it. If you forgot to give your pet maybe those treatments and there is potentially a tick on your dog, you can just kind of gently grab it close to the skin just behind the head and you can pull it off.
Yeah, it's pretty nasty. I remember our dog back at the cabin at the lake when I was growing up, and some of those ticks got pretty nasty. So I know what you're talking about with that. Now, we all like to spoil our pets since they are members of our families, and I'll bet a lot of us actually overfeed them. So how can you tell if they're being fed too much? What kinds of problems does this cause? And what advice do you have for pet owners to stick to the right amount of food?
Yes, I mean, obesity is probably one of the most common medical conditions we see with pets, and I mean, rightfully so. It's not always easy to know exactly how much you need to feed your pet because they're not able to tell you. But the main thing you need to look at is, the condition that your pet is in. We generally say if you sort of rub on the side of their chest, you kind of want to feel the ribs if you press firmly, and that sort of gives you an idea if your pet is in a good condition. The easiest way really is to feed your animal a good quality dry food, and most of those manufacturers will actually have some sort of description on the back of the bag, and that'll sort of tell you exactly how much you need to feed your pet per day. It gets a little bit more tricky if you're feeding, table food and things, because then, it's hard to quantify how much calories are in there. And then you might have to use a bit of common sense to sort of gauge how much you should give.
Okay, any advice on what ingredients to look for in cat food or dog food to make sure that they're getting good nutrition?
Um, Once again, the manufacturers that make these foods, they're the scientists and they come up with a balanced sort of diet. I would say, a good quality veterinary approved diet. So, meaning a vet has sort of looked over the ingredients and nutritionists have looked at the ingredients and they've deemed it sort of balanced. That's what I would recommend.
Okay.
There's been a slight trend in recent years to feed grain-free food, um, but there's actually a substantial amount of studies that now show that these grain-free diets are actually bad for dogs and it can lead to heart disease. So that's just something to bear in mind.
Definitely. Now, we hear differing opinions on how many times per day to feed your cat or dog. So, what is the correct answer on that one?
Most of the time, twice a day is fine, in the morning and in the evening. If you've got a little puppy and he's just a couple of weeks old, you might be better off feeding like 3 times a day. In saying that, a majority of dogs also do fine on once a day. There's not a real exact answer. It doesn't matter too much.
Okay, interesting. So, how often should pets go for a checkup at the vet?
We would definitely recommend an annual checkup at least, and that's often accompanied by, vaccinations, deworming tablets, etc. If your animal is sort of towards the later years in their lives, every 6 months might even be a good idea. Things change a lot in animals. They don't live as long, so often things change quickly. So, yeah.
So, every 6 months as the animal gets older?
Yeah, maybe towards the latter part of the life, in a dog, maybe anything upwards of 8 years. In a cat, maybe upwards of 12 years. You probably want to go for 6 monthly checkups.
Okay, interesting. Now, can you explain a little bit about parasites? What are they and how do they affect your pet? And how can we recognize it if our pet has them?
So we've got sort of two groups, external parasites, which we kind of already touched on. That's your ticks and your fleas. And then internal parasites are going to be intestinal worms mainly. And your pet can pick that up from just going to the park and sniffing around and licking things. They can pick up eggs, and the worms can actually develop in their digestive tract. So that's why we recommend, especially in the summer, to do maybe two dewormings. In the winter, you might be okay with just one or so.
Okay. How, in what way do they affect your pet? Does the pet act differently at all? How can you tell if he has it?
Sometimes a little bit hard to know.
Yeah.
Once the infestation gets really bad, you might see things like diarrhea, as the worms irritate the inside of the gut lining. And some worms actually suck the blood out of the pets, and they can sort of get anemic, so get a little bit weaker. Yeah.
Okay. So keep an eye out for that, definitely.
Yeah, hopefully we don't get to that stage.
Yeah, for sure. No, so what are the best types of treatments for these parasites? And is there a certain time of year that they come out, or are they just present all the time? It could be at any
Mainly,
point.
mainly in the warmer months, the warmer months from now on, towards October, that's sort of the main time that they'll be active. So you definitely want to worm your pet, probably twice during these warmer months.
Wow. Okay. Now, what about vaccinations? How important are they?
Well, they're very important and quite topical in this day and age with us dealing with our own viruses. But yeah, we recommend annual vaccinations, and then as the patients sort of get a little bit older, some of these vaccines can last for up to 3 years. We do rabies vaccinations, and then there's a parvo vaccine, and also a kennel cough vaccine for dogs. And then the cats also have their own specific vaccine.
All right. Okay. Talk to us a little bit about spaying or neutering your pet. How important is this?
Well, we all know that all the shelters are overrun with dogs waiting for homes. So,
Yeah.
you know, the general recommendation, we feel like there's probably enough animals around. So that's one of the sort of reasons why you'd want to spay your animal. There's also sort of health benefits to doing that, especially sort of later in life. You know, animals often get issues towards the older years. If they're intact, infections in their uterus, they can get prostate issues. So there are some benefits with regards to longevity, which makes sense to
Oh,
do to spay your
that's
animal.
that's really interesting. What would the cost be for getting this done?
It really varies from clinic to clinic. Dog spay might be a couple $100, and cat operations are generally a little bit less because they're a little bit easier, I guess.
Right. Now, I mean, Sometimes we think of our pets as our kids. So if we are parents, we all know we need to spend time with our kids. So what about time with our pets? Does spending time with our pets improve their health?
Well, we definitely know that it improves our health, but absolutely, spending good quality time with your pet at least once a day is essential. They suffer from boredom, they suffer from loneliness, and a lot of behavioral issues that develop is just due to lack of attention. They are social animals. My advice would be, rather than regarding you sitting on the couch watching TV with your pet for 4 hours, as much as you feel like you're spending time with them, they will benefit more from it if you actually spend maybe 30 minutes a day of quality time where you're absolutely dedicated to them, possibly doing training exercises or going for a walk where you're just focused on them. That's been shown to be sort of more beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Can animals develop habits over boredom, like overeating, for example?
Um, They can, if that's the only thing they can keep themselves busy with is eating, they might go down that track. Some of them develop other vices like chewing your fancy shoes or doing other things that you might not find helpful. So, occupying them with things that you'd like them to be entertained with is a good idea.
Absolutely. We have a cat who's constantly sitting at the food dish meowing at us, letting her, like, we're like, well, there's no way she could still be hungry. So we're just thinking she's eating out of boredom, kind of almost like a human trait, right?
It could be, yeah. So I mean, you could always get a few little toys. Cats like little feathers and things and they love chasing things. So there's a bunch of things you could probably try to keep her entertained.
Any advice for people who have to leave their pet at home alone all day?
Yeah, so that's a challenging, aspect of owning a pet. Most people have to go to work. When you have a young animal, so a puppy or a kitten, they often can't deal with that separation early on in their lives, and it's important to note that, and actually try maybe go home at lunchtime, spend a bit of time with a puppy, and that way they don't develop this sort of anxiety of being alone. And towards, once they mature, they're probably okay to spend the day at home, alone. But you just don't want them to sort of develop this absolute separation anxiety every time you leave. So there's a little bit of training involved with that.
Yeah, absolutely. They're like little children in so many aspects, aren't they?
Very much so.
Now, what advice or precautions do you have for anyone who wants to go to the animal shelter and get a cat or dog for their child?
Yeah, so that's definitely the first place I would go and look. Those dogs are really waiting for a home, and there's so much of them that really deserve a home. In saying that, if you're getting a pet for your child, and there's some other sort of considerations you want to take into account, depending on how small your child is. A very boisterous dog might be too much for a little baby, and you might want sort of a more of a gentler pet. Um, so I would probably recommend going to the shelter and maybe spending a day there with whatever animal you're interested in, going home, thinking about it, and then maybe going again and visiting it again. And it's a very big investment. You're going to be having this pet in your household for the next 10, 15 years. So you really want to make sure you pick the right one. So maybe a little bit of patience before making that final decision. But yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, and I've often heard that it's not a good idea necessarily to buy an animal at Christmas time. I think the shelters are kind of saying that that's a no-no. Why is that?
I think it's, when people get an animal when emotions are at play, it's much the same when you sort of overrun and you buy a new Harley Davidson and then a week later you don't really want it anymore. Um, so I think that's important for owners to realize there's a large sort of sense of responsibility when you actually get an animal and they're going to form part of your life. A cat can live up to 20 years and dogs can live up to 15 years. So you almost have to think, years in advance. Am I still going to have the time? Am I still going to have the finances to look after this little fur baby? Yeah.
Yes, good point. Think long term with that. Any advice if you have a newborn in the house? I had heard that newborn babies, and it might not be safe to have a cat near them. Any advice on that?
It really depends on the cat. You know, some cats can really play rough, and they might scratch the baby, not out of bad intentions, but just playing. But you also get lots of cats, the most gentle giants, and they'll be fine with a little baby. I don't think there's any health issues besides maybe.
Maybe it was an old wives' tale. I had heard that cats like to maybe lay across them because of the warmth and it could suffocate them. So,
Not that I've heard.
all right. Well, it looks like we are out of time, but thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Gibson.
No, it's a pleasure. It was good chatting to you guys.
Thank you. Dr. Ian Gibson is a veterinarian with Ranch Docs Veterinary Services located just outside of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.